Hello everybody, it's me again, and I'm back for another video. After a long 4-year wait and a pandemic, Jurassic World Dominion has finally come out. I think a lot of us have been waiting a long time for this, and there's been a lot of anticipation building up to it. Let's be honest with ourselves here, the critic score is not good. Do I agree with the critic score? Do I disagree? Do I understand why it's so low? I'll tell you that at the end of this review. Disclaimer, there might be a rant about respecting people's opinions at the end, just so you know. So if you want, you can skip that part near the end and just get to the end of the video itself. First, I'm going to be going over the negatives and then the positives to end on a nice note. So keep in mind, even though this video will at first be exclusively negative, the positives will be at the end. And so we're going to leave on a nice note and you guys will know my overall thoughts at the end. So though it's going to seem like I'm very negative about this movie, that's just me singling out the negatives and going over them first, then the positives near the end. Also, another note, this will be a spoiler review. You've been warned, let's just go on. So first I'm going to go over the villains. They serve their purpose, but overall the bigger ones were shallow and needed more development as time went on. Dodgson had a very sudden character change where he went from a calm, scheming man to an angry madman, and overall his motivations were, I'd say, shallow. He served his purpose and got a cool death, but in the end there's not much depth to him. Another villain, Soyono Santos. She could have been a cool and imposing villain, and we get why she's doing everything she does for money and for Biosyn, but there's still not much to her character that makes her that interesting. There's not much nuance to her. Though I liked Kayla by the end, I feel like her development was a little rushed and her motivation for helping the heroes could have been explained better. I personally didn't think we needed to see as much of Maisie's backstory as we did. I think knowing her being a clone explains enough of why Biosyn, or rather Wu, wanted to use her DNA. I think that there are just a few too many scenes with the Locust, and if they cut those scenes, as long as some others that I'll go over in a bit, I feel like we could have gotten some other scenes which I'll also talk about in a bit. I think the dinosaur scenes at points in the movie were too rapid fire, and there should have been some character scenes injected in between to take a breather, explore the characters a little more, and slow down the breakneck speed of the movie a little bit. One of the bigger complaints that I had was that we spent too much time in Biosyn Valley, and by the middle of the movie, that's where we're gonna spend the rest of the movie. If we cut some of the things that I said we didn't need, and we cut a lot of the time in Biosyn Valley that wasn't necessary, then there could have been a lot more scenes with dinosaurs actually in the world, like urban environments and things like that, for character moments. Though I'm not of the opinion that the dinosaurs aren't important enough, I do think we didn't get enough scenes of them out in the world and how they've affected the world. And from the trailers and the Dino Tracker website, it does feel a little like false advertising. I think an interesting scenario would have been that, perhaps due to inside operations, let's say, Biosyn Valley's animals have been released into the wild, and so therefore we don't need to spend as much time there. Owen could have used a little more characterization and emotion too, and Wu probably should have gotten more time, maybe near the beginning, to show the change in his character. My main issues with the protagonists is just that we didn't really spend enough time with them. Now, that's mainly it for the negatives. Now, let's go to the positives. Keep in mind, though there are vastly more positives that I listed than negatives, these aren't smaller negatives. They're overall, I'd say, bigger negatives, so that kind of accounts for things. Now, despite what I've said about settings, I'd say the plot overall is pretty good. Every character isn't forcefully pushed to every new location because the movie demands it, and you flow to every new location pretty naturally. The dinosaur scenes in this movie were great. They're all unique and interesting, not just rehashes of old movies. They provide a new experience, and most of them were very suspenseful, and some actually scary. Some of my favorites are Claire and the Therizinosaurus underwater, Owen, Kayla and the Pyroraptor, Alan, Ellie, and Maisie in the caves of the Dimetrodon, and the Atrociraptors in Malta. I think the dinosaurs in this movie were good. No longer are they the protagonists or action heroes, they're more like obstacles at this point. And though I don't think the dinosaurs have ever acted 100% realistically, the point is that in the good Jurassic media, they aren't the protagonists, and so whenever they do have genuinely animalistic scenes, I treat that as a good bonus, not necessary. So when they explained how the Rex and Giga were two apexes that couldn't coexist, I like that. And I like when the Rex backed off because she knew she could win at that moment. When they act like, nature documentary real animals, I'd say that's a plus. What I think is the requirement for me is that they're not the protagonists, they're just obstacles. That's what I think the baseline is. The inclusion of the Dimetrodon and Listersaurus were a big plus in and of themselves. The Malta scenes showed some really interesting things and the darker side of the Jurassic universe. And by Malta scenes, I mainly mean the black market scenes when talking about this in particular. I think the darker side is unfortunate, not in the quality, but in what happens. But I think it portrays an interesting concept well. There are some pretty brutal deaths in this movie, and while it's not out of character for Jurassic, they were still fun to watch. I'm of the rare opinion that the pacing of the movie was overall pretty good. The movie flowed nicely. Another unpopular opinion, I'd say, I think the dinosaurs in Jurassic World Dominion were actually an integral part of it. And if you remove them, the movie would still change drastically. Heck, the movie wouldn't even happen. The locusts were created as a result of genetic power getting into the world and into the wrong hands. Had the dinosaurs never escaped, those locusts would never have been created, and then you have no Jurassic World Dominion. So yes, the dinosaurs were important enough for the movie. I also like the overall theme of the movie, about genetic power and how, though it can be used for good, it can also be used for evil purposes. And we have to work together, trust each other, and adapt instead of letting things go however they're supposedly meant to go. It's about changing and making a difference. Now, the cinematography in this movie is beautiful. I think there are some really great looking shots, and though I think this isn't what makes a good movie, I can really appreciate it. The fog in the Biosyn Valley helps to build atmosphere, and another thing, I think the change in scenery from basically strictly tropical, except for the Lost World, into a range of different environments like urban, arid, etc. is pretty cool. Some of the references to the lore and other movies I think is also pretty cool. Now onto the characters, which I've been holding on for last. I think the new cast were really redeemed in this movie, and instead of them being bland and flat, and Owen just basically being an action figure, they felt like they were real people with real emotions and relatable motivations. All three of them I feel like were at their best in this movie, and though they were at their best, that doesn't mean they were mediocre. I think they were good. I liked Claire as she became more grounded from the beginning of the movie, and you can clearly tell that she cares about Maisie and Owen. While I think Owen got less characterization, you could still tell that he was there for Maisie as a father figure. Maisie also got a lot more characterization in this movie, and I like that. They could have used improvement, Owen more so. In the end, I think all of them were still good. I think you can tell that Owen and Claire didn't want to save the world or go beating up bad guys. In the end, all they wanted was Maisie back, because they cared for her, and I really liked that. Wu got a nice redemption arc I liked. You can tell that he's tired and worn out, and the effects of his decision has changed who he is. Though, as I said before, I think they should have shown his changing character more in the earlier stages of the movie. The new cast, Kayla and Ramsey, were pretty good. Their motivations were solid, and by the end, though not deep, they were both enjoyable. The legacy cast, though they took a little bit of time to settle back into their roles, once they did, they really bounced off each other incredibly well. They were treated with respect and overall were handled well. They felt like themselves and were enjoyable to watch. You feel like you're seeing these characters again, and I think it's really nice. And I think the moment when the new cast and the old cast meet just clicks for me. They work together. Overall, the characters were pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. Finally, I want to talk about the final scene of the movie. Mainly, the dinosaurs out in the world, kind of trusting modern animals and adapting with them. Now, I don't criticize movies for logistics errors, as that's not really what makes a good movie. Jurassic Park has them, but that's not what makes it good. It's the writing, and so that's what I criticize. And so, while logically, the final scene didn't make too much sense, that's not what mattered to me. I think the concept of what the final scene is, dinosaurs adapting and trusting one another, and the fact that it gets it across to the audience so well, along with the main theme of the movie, is pretty powerful to me. Overall, I would say this movie is really good. Not perfect, but really good. Is it the end of the Jurassic franchise that I think this franchise deserves? No, it's not the best end, but I think it's a really good movie. And even then, the Jurassic franchise isn't gonna end. There's gonna be more stuff after that. So that's mainly it for my review. And even though I'm a fan of Jurassic and love dinosaurs, I would say I'm a pretty good critic who knows what he's talking about. Please don't disregard my opinion. And so even though I enjoyed this movie, I didn't just like it for the action. Looking at it with my critic lenses, I think it holds up well. And as a movie, using said critic skills, it's really good. I absolutely disagree 100% with what most critics, a la Rotten Tomatoes, say about this movie. What I ask is that people respect others' opinions, even if they disagree with me 100% or agree with me 100%. Everyone is entitled to their own thoughts, and they're not idiots for thinking that way. If we didn't have disagreements like this, humanity would never evolve, humanity would never change, and nothing would be interesting. So please be kind. And though I don't want insults, I encourage healthy discussion. What I want to encourage the most, though, is not to use Rotten Tomatoes, both the audience and critic score, as some infallible source, or to stop taking it so seriously. What I encourage the most is that people actually go see this movie and make their own thoughts for themselves. But if you liked the video, give it a like. If you didn't, tell me why in the comments. I'd love to know why. Please go check out the Discord if you want to. The link is in the description. And with that out of the way, see you later.